Hi, everyone. We're ready to start again. Thanks for your patience. Just fixing up the live stream. Hello, and hi, people on the live stream and in the Discord. We've all made it to the last program. I'm really excited for this final part of Art in the Age of the Metaverse, which is called Outside the Metaverse. My name is Margarita Osipian. I'm an independent curator based here in Amsterdam. I think today I have the hat on for The Hum, which is a platform for internet and digital cultures that I'm a part of. So we're going to start with a keynote by Primavera De Filippi, followed by a short keynote by Barbara Cueto. And after this, we have Marina Otero also joining us in a panel discussion with Primavera and with Barbara. So I'm first going to introduce Primavera De Filippi to you. Primavera is a legal scholar at Harvard University, as well as an internet activist and artist exploring the intersection between law and technology, focusing specifically on the legal and political implications of blockchain technology. So let's give a warm applause to Primavera.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so actually I kind of immediately recently remixed my talk. So I will eventually talk about this, but that's going to be the second part of my talk. And the first part of my talk is about protocolism, which is potentially a new artistic movement that I want to describe to you because I think by naming something, you actually manifest it into reality. So what is protocolism? So in order to talk about protocolism, maybe we can raise the most important question, which is, does art steal or does art need the artist in the 21st century? As in, did it ever need it? We are not sure. So the data started with a legal talk, and it's going to end with a legal talk, which is always very interesting. If you have not heard enough about copyright law, you're going to hear a little bit more. So copyright law is based on three fundamental pillars: the author, the notion of authorship, the process of creation, the originality emanating from the author, and then, of course, the final outcome of the process, which is the work. So, first pillar, and so I'm going to pretty much try to present how those three pillars, so I'm a legal scholar, I'm a copyright scholar, and my mission in life is to demonstrate that copyright is obsolete. And so I'm going to try and claim why the three pillars of copyright pretty much makes very little sense nowadays. So first of all, the author. So what are we talking about when we're talking about the author and how technology is kind of questioning the notion of the author. So with the internet, we have seen how it has become possible to create art pieces that are highly collaborative, where there is not just one genius author, but you actually have hundreds, thousands, millions of collaborators, many of them which are anonymous, and so we can create those amazing pieces of art where we don't really, it becomes really complex to identify who has done what. And so is it a co-authorship? Is it a joint authorship? It's very difficult to know. Second, technology also can eliminate humans, at least partially, from the picture. So this very beautiful work of Tinguely, where you actually have an automatic artist. So, of course, there is an artist that created the machine, but then the machine can create pieces of artwork. And so, very important question, who is the author of the machine? Very clearly, it is Tinguely. But who is the author of the outcome generated by this machine? Difficult to say. And then sometimes it's not machine, but it's actually nature. And so we have those very amazing artists, Thomas Saracino, Amy Kate, which are relying on life, on spiders, on microbes, and so forth, in order to create works. Again, this is a collaboration between humans and nature, but who is really the author of those art pieces? Because they are actually, Saraceno didn't really make those spider webs. It just put spiders into a box, and then the spiders makes the work. And so who is really the author? Is it a co-authorship? It's hard to say. And then, of course, we have the little monkey selfie, and then like Bornelli's artwork. So sometimes we actually have things that are very intentionally created by an animal. And then the question, of course, can we even consider that there is a copyright in something that is actually only and exclusively created by a non-human being? And of course, the law so far has declared that no, we cannot assign copyright to non-human creatures. And then, of course, increasingly now we have art created by computers, mostly generative art, AI-generated art. And so again, the question is like, how is that different from machine? How is that different from animals, etc.? So it's the outcome of those artworks. It's like some artists will claim that they actually own the copyright on those. Others are like, actually, it's an AI-generated thing. The AI is the artist. What does that even mean? But right now, it's pretty unclear. Most of the today understanding is that this is machine-generated, and therefore this should not actually, this should be automatically in the public domain. But of course, there are a lot of claims that are trying to, because now there is value in those works, there is like people that claim, well, we need to find a place in which we can actually create some property rights. And then we have those, so this is the process. Well, now we have the question of what happened when the process copyright requires that there is a degree of originality. But then we have those very amazing artists, such as Marcel Duchamp, which just takes something ready-made and then sign it, and all of a sudden this becomes an amazing piece of art. Or we have Ben that actually just doesn't even bother about finding a ready-made object, just sign something, and the signature is the art piece. So great. All of a sudden the actual process of creation is eliminated by just having an artist claim, as an artist, I create value. And then we have other types of processes in which the artist is not really making the work, but the artist is actually creating a set of instruction, a set of procedure that other people can implement in order to instantiate the work. So we have, like, for instance, Yves Kleins that actually ask people to create paintings by covering themselves with paint and rolling on a piece of canvas. We have Sol Levitt that actually provide instruction about how you implement and instantiate the work as a technical engineer. And then we have generative art, which is pretty much an artist giving an instruction to a machine in order to create a variety of pieces of art. And then we have AI-generated art. So again, this becomes even more questionable because it's not even an instruction. It's actually literally just a prompt, and then the AI makes all the interpretation of how to interpret that prompt into the generation of an actual piece of art. And so more and more we see how the artist distantiates itself away from the actual production, the process of creation, and is just at the level of the ideation to a more and more abstract layer. Oops. Yeah, and so basically, and then let's go to the last pillar, which is the artwork. So we can see where we have different nature of the artwork. So when for John Cage, for instance, like silence, the artwork is the piece of silence and the noise that is generated by the audience, but the artwork actually is the idea of making a piece of silence. In the case of Boronelli, the artwork is the performance of actually making a donkey paint a particular piece of art. And so the output of the output is no longer necessarily the work itself, but in the case of generative art, it's the algorithm. So the artist is the creator of the algorithm, which then will create the work. In the case of AI-generated works, it's like the prompting. It's whatever you input to the AI model in order to actually generate an outcome. But the actual outcome of the art is more questionable, whether it is really the output generated by the artist or whether it's the output generated by whatever is in the middle that stands between the artist and the production. And so what I suggest here is that there is perhaps a new type of artistic movement, if we want to call it a movement, but there is a new way, a new modality of creating artworks where the artwork is actually the protocol that can then be instantiated into a variety of different artworks. And so if we think of protocol as art, then what is exactly this piece of art? Well, so the art piece is the set of rules or guidelines, whatever is the protocol, that is sufficiently original to actually reflect the personality of the author and can be therefore recognized as belonging and originating from the author. And so in the case, if we take the metaphor, the art is actually the recipe that the artist has created rather than the actual dish that is implementing the recipe. And what's very interesting when we think about art as protocol is that inherently everything that is instantiated is a form of co-authorship, because the person, the machine, whatever, the thing or the human that implements the protocol will inherently be a co-author because it is the one that chooses how to implement and how to instantiate this protocol into an art piece. And so there is this kind of like inherent collaborative effort that comes into it, because in order for this being a protocol piece of art, there needs to be a sufficient degree of artistic creativity. So if the protocol is just like perfectly directed into only one possible output, in this case, this is just like one instruction, whereas if the protocol is just a generic protocol that needs to be instantiated, then it requires a particular degree of arbitrary, discretionary decision, which therefore provide artistic creativity to the person implementing the protocol, and that's where co-authorship emerges. And then, very interesting, because we are talking again about copyright, all of a sudden, we're not really talking about reproduction anymore, we're actually talking about production. This means that every time a new instance of the protocol is being created, then they are a new artwork themselves, so we are adding to the new body of work, but this actually contributes both as a new art piece emanating from the person that instantiated the protocol, and also it contributes to the protocolist collection of artworks, because every single one of those art pieces are incorporating the originality of the idea of the protocol that the protocolist has created. And so in some way, the protocolist actually wants that more and more and more people are actually instantiating this protocol into a work. Now, let's go back to copyright. Somehow, this type of protocolism, the reason I really love it is because it actually demonstrates and it kind of breaks down all the pillars of copyright law. And to my view, it also promotes this completely different approach to co-authorship, to remixing, and to production/reproduction, which is much more in line with the concept of openness, of Creative Commons, of like free culture, which the digital environment enables, and that as a Creative Commons supporter, I think we generally need to promote. So let's go back to copyright. Sorry, you're just gonna come out of it with like way too much copyright talk in the head. So copyright is this very interesting concept of intellectual property, which creates artificial scarcity on the non-rival good that is information. The artwork itself is non-rival and non-scarce, but usually the physical medium in which we are producing or instantiating the work is scarce, and then in order to kind of realign the scarcity of the medium with the non-scarcity of the artwork, then we create copyright, which create artificial scarcity on these non-rival goods, so that now we have scarcity at every level. And then comes the digital environment, which somehow removes scarcity in the medium. And so now we have artificial scarcity in the content, and then we remove the scarcity in the medium. And so like, how do we do? And then now comes blockchain technology, which reinstantiates a new form of scarcity into the digital domain, so that now we don't have only intellectual property which creates artificial scarcity, but we also have blockchain technology that creates actual technical and digital scarcity. Now, why is it interesting? And this is where I think this is very important, because while NFT and blockchain technology introduce this new type of digital scarcity, this type of digital scarcity actually liberates the need of having artificial scarcity at the content level, because all of a sudden now you have new monetization model that emerge for digital artists, in the sense that before the advent of NFT, digital artists could only monetize their work by licensing copyright in the content, in the artwork, whereas now the artwork can actually be free of copyright, Creative Commons, CC0, and so forth, because people can now sell the unique, authentic digital copy of the work. And so, again, as we said in the morning, you can have individual ownership of the copies, and you can have universal access to the content. Now, let's talk about crypto art. So we hear a lot about, when in the NFT space, we hear a lot about crypto art and so forth. And what I found very interesting is that actually there is a lot of things that is defined as crypto art, which has very little to do with crypto art, in my humble opinion, because it is pretty much as if we take like a physical artwork and then we put it for sale on eBay, and all of a sudden we are talking about digital artworks just because it is sold on a digital medium. And so in the majority of the NFT today, we have a digital artwork, which is very nice and high quality, which is sold through an NFT system on the blockchain, and all of a sudden we call it blockchain art just because it is being sold via a blockchain auction, whereas it is in fact just a digital artwork. And so what is crypto art? So in my view, an actual blockchain art is an art piece that can only exist with blockchain. That is not just sold on a blockchain, but that the actual artwork itself exists because there is a blockchain. If we remove the blockchain, the art piece can no longer exist. And so I'm going to give an example. So this is one work that I've been working on for like way too many years now, which is a blockchain-based art piece, and which I discovered later on, after having creating all this theory about protocolism, that it is actually a very good example of a protocolist artwork. So I discovered that I am myself a protocolist. So Plantoid is a blockchain-based life form. So it's an instantiation of a particular life form that lives and tries to reproduce itself on the blockchain. Basically, it has three important features. It is autonomous in the sense that it is not controlled by anyone. It is self-sufficient because it can collect all the resources necessary to reproduce itself. And then, of course, like every other life form, it has a mechanism of reproduction or self-reproduction. So how does it work? Well, the majority of plants, they cannot reproduce themselves on their own. They rely on third parties, like butterflies or bees, in order to actually help them to reproduce through the process of pollination. So a plantoid actually also is not fully capable of reproducing itself on its own, and it relies on the process of capitalization, which relies on third parties that provide necessary capital in order to enable them to reproduce themselves. Okay, so a plantoid is actually a physical sculpture. It's the Android version of a plant. So it's a metallic plant made of chains. So the body is a physical sculpture that exists in the physical world, and then the spirit, the soul of the plantoid, actually exists as a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. And so those two components actually interact with each other in order to reproduce. So the reproduction is made of 3 different phases. The first one is the capitalization phase. So every plantoid has its own wallet. It has its own smart contract on Ethereum that people can actually send funds to. And so when you send funds to the plantoid, you're basically providing some initial capital to help them into the reproduction process. And what happened is that so when you feed the plantoid comes to life and activate itself in various ways, depending on the plantoids. And for instance, it's going to start to play music. And the people that have fed it now can interact with the various sensors that exist on the plantoid. And these will, for instance, if it's a musical one, is going to modify the music that is being emitted. So there is a generative musical algorithm that is reacting to the sensors. And at the end, so the more you pay, the longer you can play with the plantoid. And at the end of that, everything you have created is now minted as an NFT and is sent back to the person that has fed the plantoid. And so as a pollinizator, the human has purchased through capital as seed of the plantoid. Now, what they can do with the seed, they can sell them on the secondary market, and every time the seed is being sold on the secondary market, there is a portion that will be sent back to the plantoid. So it's kind of a royalty system. The second phase of reproduction is the mating phase, which is when the plantoid will try to find a mate in order to reproduce itself. And so the way it works is that when the plantoid has acquired a particular amount of funds, it's open a call for proposal, and then anyone, artist, designer, whatnot, they can submit proposition about how they envision to create the next version, the next instantiation of the plantoid. And then all those that have collected the seeds, so the people that own the NFTs, they can vote. Now it's kind of like a DAO voting model, and they can select the proposition that they like the most. And then this leads to the third phase of reproduction, which is when the plantoid will automatically transfer the funds that it has received to the winner of the selected proposition, which is then hired, commissioned by the plantoid in order to create a new version of itself. I think that might be a movie, but we probably have to wait a little bit. Yeah. So this is just a little, this is plantoid. I wanted to bring it here, but I didn't. So you can feed the plantoid. And this is, so this is plantoid number 13. So you cannot hear the music, but now it's actually generating music. I can hear. It's very experimental music. And so you can interact with the sensor, and you can generate very scary music. You have to kind of learn how to make the music good. Okay, and then you can reveal the NFT, and then once you reveal the NFT, it comes into your wallet, and then you can visualize it on OpenSea, and then you can start selling it. Okay. So the music is very bad, but you need to spend a lot of money in order to learn how to play it. Okay, so this is the genealogical tree of the plantoid. So this is like how they have evolved and how they have created siblings and childs of each other. So right now there is 12 plantoid. The one that you see was the plantoid number 13, which is currently being built. And so every time an artist is creating a new plantoid, there is a particular genetic code that they have to respect. So as you can see, for instance, plantoid tree has introduced like the wings. And so all the descendants of plantoid tree, they also have to have wings. So every artist that creates the plantoid chooses the new gene that is incorporated into this species, and then it branched out, and everyone has to fulfill the same condition, and then every time there is a new plantoid, a new gene can be introduced. And so the idea is to create this kind of evolutionary algorithm, or like digital Darwinism, in which the plantoid that are the most popular, the one that can attract a maximum amount of funds, will be able to reproduce themselves more, and so their species will flourish, whereas the ones that are not popular, they will just like fade into extinction. There is also a pyramid scheme because it's a blockchain project, so there needs to be a pyramid scheme, but it's also a very positive pyramid scheme. First of all, because I'm at the top of the pyramid, so that's always good, but also because it creates an actual positive incentive for people to try and create the best possible plantoid, because every time the plantoid is reproducing itself, the children, the new plantoid, is sending back money also to the parent, right? And so there is actually all of a sudden an incentive for my artwork to reproduce itself as many possible time, because then I will get as many royalties as possible from all the descendancy. And then finally, very important, this is completely breaking up the concept of copyright for a few reasons. First of all, because there is an incentive to disseminate the work as much as possible. I want the plantoid to be as visible as possible, because that's what will ensure that it gets more money. I want the plantoid to be remixed and the derivative work as many, because I will get more royalty. And most importantly, for the first time in history, thanks to blockchain, it is now possible to feed, to actually pay. So usually you pay an artist and you hope that the artist will continue to create works that you like. Whereas now you can actually pay the art piece itself, and it is the art piece through its governance model that will choose who is the next artist that is entitled to reproduce it. And so not all the plantoids are made by me, it's mostly my friends, but nonetheless, it's the governance structure that chooses who is the artist that has the right, that he will be commissioned by the art piece in order to create and reproduce itself. So that's how we go back to protocolism, and this is a discovery, because I didn't realize this was protocolism, that this is obviously one, in which like my goal in life is that there is millions of plantoids in the world. But of course, I don't have the time, I don't have the will to actually create millions of plantoids. And so actually, I want people to reproduce the plantoid as much as possible. And actually, the whole design of the plantoid is designed so that more and more people have an incentive to create new plantoids, because the more the reproduction happen, the more the production happen, right? And in fact, all of those plantoids, whether I've made them or whether my friends have made them or whether people I don't even know have made them, they're actually my works because everyone recognizes them as plantoids. And so all of a sudden, we are all benefiting from it. The plantoid is reproducing itself. The artist that created the plantoid is creating an art piece that is an art piece in their own right, and they are the author, but I'm also the author. We are co-authors, even though I never know them. I never knew that they existed. Yeah, pictures. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
And we'll do the questions afterwards when we have the sofa conversation over here. So our second talk of this program is from Barbara Cueto. She was already introduced earlier this morning, but I'm going to reintroduce her again for those of you who were not here from the beginning. Barbara is the digital curator of CO Berlin. Her projects are at the intersection of contemporary art, new technologies, and activism. She has published, convened, and curated projects internationally at institutions like the Singapore Art Center, the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, Marez, Impact Festival, the Apple, and many, many others all around the world. So I'm going to welcome Barbara up to the stage.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks for staying until the very last one. This is always the challenge of speaking the last. Probably you are already very tired. Part of this, what I'm going to present today, is part of my PhD, so bear with me because I'm going to try to make it as understandable as possible. But I wrote my PhD in the middle of the pandemic. I was alone for 2 years, and I was very much on my head. So my PhD was about the poetics and the politics of blockchain, and today I'm going to present this first part that talks a bit more about the politics. So I'm going to be focused on a bit more, as I said, on the politics and more concretely on how to think about blockchain as a space for dissent. So my intention is not to propose blockchain as a solution for every governance problem, monetary rearrangement, or imbalance in the art world power structure. This is my PhD, and this talk, of course, is dedicated to the exploration of blockchain as a tool for radical imagination. So I won't be focusing on let's say, on results, but more impossibilities. And I will be diving in the ways it makes us think, in the structures it allows us to construct, and the paradigms it aims to depose. So this talk inquires into how blockchain continues and expands the project of dissidence that was started for the social movements in the 2010s. And I will then delve to explain this in how blockchain becomes a structure for social organizing. And in this way, I will explain how this technology becomes a place for a site for place-based politics that generates a new type of dissidence that is attuned to today's society. Okay. Yes. So today, I guess maybe this is the next one. All right. So today I will be moving away from, try it as much as I can, from all the financial aspects that usually are talked with in relation to blockchain. So I will try to move this, and thinking about it as a space for dissent. And to start with this, I need to move back in time and start in 2008 with two moments that, one is as everyone knows, that Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. And then the other one that maybe you, of course, know is that Satoshi Nakamoto released his white paper, Bitcoin peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And there was only 2 months between these moments that radically changed our understanding of economy today. So this really doesn't work. Okay. So there has been a constant feeling of crisis since then. So we have the Arab Spring that happened in 2011, and not too far after that, there was a string of protests, as we all remember, in the US and in Europe. So 15M, Getzi, Occupy. And to understand how these movements were different from the ones before, we have to look into the composition, the structure, and the prefigured capacity. So I'm going to start a little bit with the composition, which kind of falls into this idea of this big umbrella of the new social movement theories, which describes this movement as this group of people are not a homogeneous group, which means that they are not they don't get together because there's shared myths or narratives, or there's no relation to identity politics. So what unites the groups is that they share the same goals and values, and these goals and values represent a profound crisis and a profound conflict with the structures of power. So there's an incompatibility between the system and the people that is supporting the movement. And in this, particularly the ones that happened in 2010, there was technological mediation, immediate connectivity, and effective connection, what actually make the movements got traction and continue and be as strong as they became. For example, we know that Twitter became this place, this public arena where people could actually talk together and set in motion all the Arab Spring. But of course, there's no chronological system here, so I will be jumping back and forward. So this is an image of the general strike that happened in 1996 and 1997 in South Korea, and this happened because there was a draconian labor law. And of course, so this was a strike that lasted 4 weeks and kind of like was nationwide, was able of shutting down the auto chip production, there was disrupted hospitals, television, public transport. It all started as a movement based on union constituencies, but like all of a sudden the protest really spread and then became such a gigantic movement, and it was all because of the coordination that they have. And to coordinate these, perhaps sounds a bit weird now, but they used two things. They used faxes as a way of coordination. So each fax acts as a node, and they created a decentralized network of resistance that allows them to create a simultaneous protest around the country. And they use, this is one of the website that actually still works, surprisingly, that it was the way that they were doing reports on how the movement was evolving. So this is a very early case of technopolitics, which combines technological awareness and knowledge and digital expertise as a way which has radical political ambition, which would utilize the technology as a site for the struggle in itself. So as we see, these waves of digital activism are not they're not ways of straight lines or anything. There's always a constant update on the technology that the movement is appropriating in order to organize and also to share the ambitions of the movement. So. As in terms of structure, they use meshwork, which is a term that is borrowed from digital technologies, which functions as a local network typology which creates an infrastructure with nodes connect directly, dynamically, non-hierarchically to self-organize and self-configure. And this is translated in digital activism, creating a network, as a peer-to-peer contributions that support the whole movement, both online and offline. So in a way, this is what we with this system of organization creates, is transposing the concept of open source cooperation to the physical world, meaning that there's a gigantic, let's say, pool of common resources where everyone could easily join, participate. So the more users, the higher is the power of the network, or the value of the network as a whole. And in this way, also we are able of bypassing systems like hierarchies of power. This is a very informal way of decentralization, let's say, and they are able of overcoming crisis situations like uprisings, or also, of course, totalitarian regimes. So I'm going to post 2 examples. The first, this one is this is 3 screenshots from Telegram groups in Hong Kong in 2019, where there was the huge demonstrations, and these Telegram groups were each of them they were organizing. One, it was about gear, so helmets, masks, etc., medical attention, and also police reports and travel. So because to organize how people move, not everyone was in the front line all the time. They were shifting and creating this movement. So why they was so resilient is because they were so well coordinated, and they utilized this system of a network, of a meshwork. But of course, these meshwork systems also happen afterwards, after the movement. So for example, this is an example of Spain, in a world post-indignados, let's say. They are grupos de consumo, which means that they are consumer networks that, in a way, they're influenced by solidarity economies, that they're inspired by cooperatives. In these networks that, for whoever wants to participate, they buy groceries directly to producers, so they bypass kind of the traditional systems to warranty fair payment. So in a way, they're also creating a decentralized peer-to-peer producer and consumer network. And in a way, they also channel this anti-establishment sentiment. So one of the things that is for me more interesting about this movement, apart of course how angry everyone was, it was also, this is the notion of prefiguration, which means that it was replaced, prefiguration replaces the temporal separation between the struggle of today and the goals of the future. And emphasizes direct implementation. And for Manuel Castells, I really like this, very poetic, he calls it timeless time. And during these moments of protest, perhaps some of you were during the assemblies, but it feels like we were all in a moment of impasse where everyone was able of being far away from the time, daily constrictions of the moment, and we were all in a way living the utopia that we wanted to live in. So there's kind of a dual experience of time in which the ideas of the goals for the future became the norms ruling the present. And this prefigurative capacity became will become very interesting when we think about blockchain later on. So to sum up, These movements appropriate any technology, whether it's a fax or a Telegram group or Twitter, to create this informal, decentralized network, which is a network of support. And this is also very important. It also creates this strong system of kinship between all the peers in the movement. All these movements, of course, are rooted in the, let's say, specificities of the location. Whether it's Madrid and it's different from what happened in Turkey, they all share this anti-establishment system sentiment. So the places become the locus of possibility and the material manifestations of a certain worldviews and the knowledges that are within that community. So the economic geographer Doreen Massey suggests that space is not a mere container for social relations, but to the contrary, social relations are constitutive of space and place, meaning that the spaces, of course, is a much more complex concept that is not bound really to a specific location, but it also represents a collective sense of belonging. So blockchain not only provides an alternative economic system, but also becomes a social apparatus that permits, of course, as we know, to shape new rules, new institutions, new social orders, new politics. So blockchain can compose a governance structure that is adapted to the worldviews, to the shared desires, to the knowledge of a community that is implementing. So, and this group is never, it doesn't necessarily need to be bound to a specific location, because blockchain in itself becomes the site for place-based politics. Okay, so let's move to art now. If this lets me. Okay. So maybe some of you remember the question of funding from Documenta. This is how we look there, which is a growing collective of cultural producers and a community organizers from Palestine that aims to rethink the economy of funding and how it affects the cultural producer, both in Palestine and in the world. And maybe some of you were there, and it was a very lively situation, really very interesting, but perhaps most of you remember this, which was that it was vandalized before Documenta opened, and the question of funding was accused of anti-Semitism. But although this made it to international news, a lot of people fail to see that also the question behind the idea of the question of funding was Daira, which is a blockchain structure to support community economies in Palestine.
Not having a measuring tape to measure a table doesn't mean the table does not exist. We only don't know its dimensions. Same is for communal resources. Not having money to exchange them does not mean they don't exist or that they don't have value. Daira is a medium that uses blockchain technology for circulating communal economic value by helping the community to measure and exchange the value of their local resources in the absence of money. It is an Arabic word meaning circle and circulating. It is a noun and a verb, where the act of sharing and moving local resources helps the community to maintain its wealth. We will tell you how it goes. Imagine, or don't imagine, just look around you. There is a financial crisis in the society. The community has less money to exchange for their products and resources. Now, let's imagine this scenario. A graphic designer needs a space to give a workshop to generate income. She has no money to rent a space. She joins the Daira ecosystem. She gets validation points. She contacts a cultural institution. They have a space to offer her, but they depend on rent to pay salaries. A farmer wants to join the graphic design workshop to enhance their communication abilities, but they also don't have money to pay. This is what happens. The cultural institution mints Daira from the network for sharing their space with the graphic designer. The graphic designer validates that the cultural institution did offer its venue. As a result, the cultural institution can now pay part of the salaries in Daira, and the graphic designer gets a space to host the workshop. The graphic designer mints Daira for the knowledge they shared with the farmer. This process is validated by the farmer using their validation points. The farmer gets knowledge when they couldn't pay for it with money, and the graphic designer gets some Daira to spend in the Daira ecosystem. Okay,
so Daira shows us that like any other technology before, it could also be appropriated, it could be reconstructed and reinvented to create this hybrid space of possibility that is nested in the same desire for change of the previous social movement and also channels the same disaffection with the structures of power. As an artistic practice, and I'm not going to go too much into this, but like these artistic practices think through the technology and they create a new means or a new medium for socially engaged practices because they tap, instead of like a community that is present in one location, it actually goes translocal. So it also, to me, is also like an expansion of institutional critique because what they do really is like infrastructure critique. So that is one of the examples, but of course there's many others, like for example Black Swan that they were doing the workshop yesterday. These all imply a non-compliance with the ethos of hyper-capitalism. So, but if we stay, of course, in terms of capitalism and anti-capitalism, we really miss the truly radical potential of blockchain, because blockchain is actually a sandbox for institution making, and as such, it can create new forms of social coordination and give rise to new agencies that are both human and non-human, because blockchain really is a tool for radical imagination. So these projects are always inherently political because they challenge the status quo and they propose an alternative, and as such, they hold the potential for disruption. So blockchain infrastructure conveys this new type of dissent because it allows to surpass this binary between the capitalism and anti-capitalism, and they enact a form of resistance that creates a network of collaboration that proposes an alternative social imaginary, which is against like the movements that were before, against the hegemonic systems that were So, okay, this is another image from Daira that I really like. So, blockchain in a way becomes a free space. And when I mean a free space, it's like a symbolic place for politics that is necessary to create a project of dissidence. So the texture that defines social movements before becomes somehow the breathing ground of these new blockchain-based projects, as they channel also the goals of them in three different ways. One is like they offer a communicative environment that is decentralized and uncensored. They also formalizes the decision-making process, and this becomes really important when we talk about like the problems that happen in the internalities of the social movements. Like it was really hard to get in an assembly like a clear political standpoint because of this lack of conflict resolution. And it also, thirdly, they also catalyzes the value of a community in this transparent governance structure. So in a way, the technology is able of formalizing the meshwork system, for example, as a DAO, and it reroutes this affective connection that existed before, creating let's say, a structures of belonging produced by the technology. So as a result, these blockchain-based structures encompass this prefigurative idea of the timeless time, because, I mean, just a reminder, like this prefiguration means that there's no temporal separation, as in, like the ideals of the community become the norms that they rule the present. So in blockchain, in a way, it replicates the same temporal matrix because we are also using an ex-ante regulatory framework, which means that we are, through smart contracts, a community will be able of defining their experience of the present as if they were the future, because the ideas of the future become the goals that are, like their ideas and future goals become exactly the rules that they find both the present and the future. So if prefiguration was meaning always to like this creating direct action, in a way blockchain brings it about. So, and I go back to the same slide. Wait. Ah, no. Yeah, here. To the same stuff that I wrote when I was doing the PhD. I thought it was very useful for me. So this talk, in a way, was an invitation to rethink blockchain as a tool that could build pockets of resistance that empower a community in their quest for emancipation. And naturally, the technology cannot going to code away all our problems, but that's why we need to think about it politically before it could be able of redesigning socially. So every different configuration of blockchain constructs a social reality, not only because it's based on a particular worldview, but also because this decentralized technology is able of staging that political reality. So blockchain permits a new form of prefiguration that can embody this political political imaginaries that before couldn't exist, and they surpass always the capitalism and anti-capitalism. So blockchain can be created and recreated endlessly, adapting all the affordance to the shared goals of a community, and all this value system could also be embedded into this governance system. So blockchain really could be put to work to any political project because it's a hyper-political tool. So in a way, blockchain permits this new form of dissent because it makes possible these post-capitalist networks of affects that is uniting a translocal community against the structures of power. So blockchain is, as I said, for place-based politics, which is able of linking the practice in the present with an unwritten future, and in turn, it writes the future through the practice of today. Thank you very much.
Primavera and Marina, can you come up to the stage? Hello. Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to introduce the third person who's joining us here, which is Marina Otero Versier, who's currently the head of the MA Social Design Masters at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And last year in 2022, she received the Harvard Wheelwright Prize for a project on the future of data storage called Future Storage Architectures to Host the Metaverse. So just to kind of bring Marina into this conversation here, maybe you could just say a few words on that project. Because I think when we spoke last time, you hadn't really started the research yet. You just got the prize and it was all there, but now you've started traveling and doing some research. So maybe you can just give us a little update on it.
Yeah. So yeah, the project is about basically following the pipes of the metaverse, like trying to understand the digital infrastructures that might be making possible such a thing, like all the different projects that we have been thinking today. So I've been looking into data centers in different places. I started with north of Sweden, Iceland, Chile, and I will go to Australia, Lagos, Singapore, and other places. Basically looking into different models of data storage, models that are taking into account the ecological conditions through which data is stored and managed, and also social conditions around which these data centers operate. So basically, as you probably know, the data centers consume a lot of energy, emit a lot of CO2, consume water, and have been lately, having a lot of social struggles, political struggles around their construction. So places like the Netherlands have regulated the construction of hyperscalar data centers, also the city of Dublin, other countries like Singapore, so and many different charts think of a potential zone of insufficiency where the data that we are producing is larger than the capacity that we have to store them in these infrastructures. So I visit those places that are supposed to be at the forefront of these conversations, new prototypes for data storage, and also other storage mediums that might not be connected to a server, but DNA data storage, crystal, fluorescent dye, and many others like quantum computing and so on. So I'm very much interested in a question that was flowing around the presentations about scarcity, in a way, the connection between notions of scarcity and the digital infrastructure, and obviously the socio-political context in which we are located.
Thank you. Maybe to kind of expand on the kind of ecological question, we're supposed to think outside of the metaverse. I was maybe to Primavera and to Barbara. How do you take that into account? Because one of the critiques of the blockchain is also scaling. scaling it up, when you have these kind of distributed consensus mechanisms, how do you scale it up? Maybe it needs to be distributed in another form, but have you come across this ecological question in your own work when you're thinking about the blockchain and its kind of potentialities also for dissent?
Does this work? Yes. Like I always have this question: why do we need to scale up? Like, where is always this ever growth? That is always going up, but like for what reason? I mean, we're also I don't know. I think like we're also not confused, but like everyone has become this like neoliberal mind in ourselves that like we always have to go up. We always have, it's like maybe we don't really need that, and then it's maybe we actually need to think about blockchain in this way. Maybe it's not mass adoption. Everyone is the same one. Maybe this is like functions as a pocket for resistance for for a community in itself. Maybe it doesn't have to be. That's good enough. Like, I mean, if you adopt it and it works. And of course, the ecological question rises up every single time. There's also new now. We don't need to use proof of work, so it can also like be sustainable in a way. So, yeah, maybe.
Same.
It's the question that I think on the one hand, of course, this is a problem. On the other hand, there is a lot of innovation in that sense that is trying to figure out how to make it less energy consuming. And as Barbara says, like it's not about like everything need to be always constantly stored on the blockchain. It's more about when is it that we really need a blockchain and how do we minimize the amount of storage just for the thing that really needs to be untamperable, while also building layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, whatever, with different level of securities and therefore different levels of energy consumption.
Yeah, maybe if I may, I agree. I mean, in the places I've been visiting already, there's many different technologies that are being used, some methodologies for reusing the heat that comes from the servers, and in some cases are used to heat greenhouses where tomatoes grow. In other cases, they grow worms that are fed to chickens, and the chickens are super happy because instead of dry food, they get worms. So it's like entire circular systems, and in some cases, this excess heat goes into the city grid. That is the case in Stockholm. So many things, but at the end, when I follow all these pipes, I always find a lot of externalities. Most of these systems have impact in local communities, indigenous communities, as in the case of the Sami community in the north of Sweden and Norway, in Chile, in Atacama, or very specific communities that are nearby data centers or even in London, that recently areas of the city cannot have more housing because most of the grid is taken by data centers. So it's happening everywhere, and I totally agree that there is not, from what I can see, a totalizing universal solution that could be applied, and perhaps these more smaller scale, different solutions that are very specific and specialized. We start to think about data not as something that is just like, homogeneous, but something that we can identify different types of information data and how to treat it differently through different models of storage, preservation, care, and circulation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Or any questions on the Discord as well?
I have a question to Marina.
Yeah, of course.
To move away from the blockchain and focus more on the metaverse, there is not many people, I guess, but there is some people that bring forward this narrative, which I find interesting, and yet after investigating, I just don't have an answer, which is essentially the same with the internet is, the internet, of course, it costs a lot in terms of infrastructure, but think about all the gain that you get because people are not traveling anymore because of like the digital, and the metaverse, there is like this interesting argument that I'm starting to hear more and more, and I have to say I'm a bit skeptical, but at the same time, I don't know, which is, think about how much energy gain we can get from the metaverse, not only because we're traveling less, because all of a sudden we can have like VR relationship with people, but also because of object, because of augmented reality, because of virtual reality. We don't need to print those little pieces of plastic all the time, because now we can just like have an iPad and whatever, right? So there is this argument, and interestingly, I tried to dig into it, and I tried to like do some research about like to which extent is the cost of the metaverse, and what is the benefit, energetic benefit of the metaverse. And it's very interesting because the internet tells you exactly what you want to find. And so I found like studies that says like, yes, the metaverse is actually making us gain so much, like it has a cost, but the benefits are so much higher. And then I saw the opposite studies that say, well, actually, no, the cost of the metaverse is insane. And the problem is like, when do you stop? Right? Like, how far are you going into the chain to calculate the cost of the metaverse? And how far are you going to the chain to calculate the benefits of the metaverse? So I'm curious, as part of your research, like, do you have an opinion in terms of so where shall we stop? First of all, considering the cost, but also, are there tangible energy benefits to using the metaverse, and do they compensate anything of those costs, or is it just like some weird narrative that sounds good in some conference talk, but
And right now, the energy that is consumed by the digital infrastructure equals the aviation industry. So there was not such a thing of like, yeah, it was a reduction of energy consumed, of fuel used by travel. We stopped traveling during the pandemic, but then there was a peak on consumption of data, which is very energy intensive. So it's not that easy. I don't have the right balance. I'm also trying to understand what it means, but what I can say is that it's all a question of a scale. So whatever we do and whatever technology we use, if we overuse it and we have a tendency overthinking that there is limitless resources in that direction, then we will end up falling in the same trap. The question of the metaverse, the problem is that we, in the moment that we think that resources on the, let's call it physical reality, are scarce, we find a place where, we don't see the scarcity in those places. That's why I think both of your projects are so interesting, to create, what type of notions of artificial or non-artificial scarcity are created in relation to the imaginaries around the digital. And so I don't think obviously there are certain balances, and in some cases, you can use the digital space as a way of rehearsing or practicing things that don't get into production immediately, and then you save material, but the consumption that generates is also very high. So it's unknown exactly how the benefits will impact. And meanwhile, there is more and more trouble as well in thinking that, and maybe I'm entering another terrain, but I think it also connects to your talks. These questions of scarcity in terms of value is not only about natural resources, but we are much used to think that data, we have an production of data, and data is a resource that is not scarce. And then that's why when we think about NFT, we think about this artificial scarcity created, but all the graphs that I'm seeing about this potential zone of insufficiency point to a possible future in which data is not a resource that is so accessible. Now we are used to have a phone that every time has more data storage. Dropbox offers more data storage, Google as well, and so on. But that's not perhaps going to last for many different reasons, because maybe it's interesting for certain companies to create a scarcity to create more value, or for ecological reasons or political reasons. So suddenly this artificially created scarcity that we see in the NFTs might not be so artificial, and we will be operating in a space where we actually accumulating data on our own might not be so easy. So there will be others accumulating data, using that data for profit, but for us will not be so easy because of many different reasons. So I think these regimes are extremely fascinating in relation to questions of social engagement and resistance struggles, and also forms of copyright and obviously ecology intertwined.
We have 5 more minutes, so if someone has a question on their mind, this is your chance.
Hello, it's me. Sorry, I'm gonna break the conversation. I really liked this last part. But I have a question for Primavera. There is something that maybe it's because I'm not mastering all the notions, but I don't understand what is different between protocolism and conceptual art from the 60s. Because ultimately, the idea during this part of history was also to create protocols, and the art piece was actually the protocol more than the end result. For instance, with Lawrence Weiner doing these statements that were protocols, and at the first place, the art piece was not the writing, but was the interpretation of the audience towards this writing. So is it protocolism? Is the difference between protocolism and conceptual art the fact that it's connected to the blockchain and that there is some kind of capital-related system, or not?
I think the answer is not at all. I don't think, I think there is quite a few potential art pieces that are blockchain art, that are protocolist, but you can have an infinity of protocolist artwork that have nothing to do with the blockchain. The distinction, I will say, between conceptual art and protocolism, as this new movement that doesn't exist yet, a protocol is a conceptual entity, but it is specifically something that is inviting other things or other people to instantiate it into an actual art piece, right? So the protocol is like, it's an art piece that is not finite yet, in the sense, it is finite as a protocol, but it doesn't have a manifestation yet as an actual instantiated art piece, and it requires intervention from some other artist that takes the protocol. So again, recipe and dish. So if I'm a chef, I can create a recipe. Maybe I will never cook the dish, right? And so my work is the recipe, which is the protocol. And then anyone that chooses to instantiate the recipe, and there is millions of ways in which the same recipe can be instantiated, because there is like a particular discretion that is left to the co-author of the protocol art piece that is then creating that, right? And that's the distinction between a traditional conceptual art piece, which is still a concept, but it's finite, and then you can just experience it. Whereas the protocol, you cannot experience it until it has been manifested into an instance.
Isn't it connected then to the difference between authorship and allographic art? I don't remember exactly the word. But for instance, in music, you are writing musical scores, and the one that will be interpreting those musical scores is also an artist that is interpreting the work. Then that's kind of protocolism as well, right?
Yeah, I think the music is a very interesting instance of like you can write a score, and then there is many different ways in which you can interpret the score. The more space for interpretation, the more it becomes a protocolist art piece. So if you're playing the score, you can have different skill sets about how you play it. If it's like very strict, then it's less of a protocolist. If it's more of a general recipe, about the score, and then you still like, jamming, right? So you can create a protocol for jamming, and then the more there is artistic endeavor into the instantiation, the more it looks like a protocolist artwork as opposed to just being like an interpretation.
So unfortunately, because we were running late, now we have to wrap up, or else the evening is going to go quite long. But hopefully we can continue some of these conversations later on. So I'm going to welcome Leonardo back up to the stage to wrap things off. Should we leave the stage? Thank you.
You're off the hook. Almost everyone is off the hook. Thanks for staying with us until now, and for the people watching as well. It was an energy-intensive day, but personally I learned so much, and I hope the same is for all of you. Thank you to all the speakers for the extremely generous insights. Thanks to the audience also for engaging with the topics with such curiosity. I was actually tasked to give a summary of the day. Which, you feel me, right? It's a bit, but maybe, maybe I can just give you like one last snapshot of what has happened, for reminding everyone why we were here. So we started the day with Michaela with a great keynote that really opened the door of the metaverse for all of us, showing us how complex it is to regulate such a space and guarantee the rights of artists and creators. Then we had Trevor McFedris and Gina Lee that really brought us to the state of the art. Gina on the side of building actually the metaverse that we've been talking about, and Trevor on the latest in Web3, the economy of creation, AI and music. Then with Moreshin Hayalari, Chao Tayana, and Kevin Bray, we looked into the ways of remembering and how to reimagine forgotten also histories through virtual technology, but also without, and think about privilege, access, and colonialism. With Kaiken, Ali Islami, and Moving Castles, they guided us through their worlds and the many ways that wordling can take on a personal, communal, and speculative level. And then now, Primavera De Filippi, Barbara Cueto, and Marina Otero challenge us to see opportunities where the frictions are, and really think productively through these technologies, visualizing also spaces of power, whether that's electricity or whether that's politics. And then of course Ian on the Friday led us deep into a possible psychoanalysis future of the Webiverse, and there's going to be more episodes to come, so I think that conversation will continue. Thanks everyone, the drinks are outside. Have a good evening.